In today's video, I explain how I created my watercolor and color pencils piece Imentet, which is inspired by an Egyptian goddess of the afterlife. I find Egyptian mythology and art incredibly powerful and mysterious, and after having visited the Louvre in Paris myself, I was blown away by the time, effort, and masterly craftsmanship that went into creating these elaborate and intricate figures, paintings and coffins. I've watched countless documentaries about pyramids and ancient Egypt, but seeing those artifacts myself is something entirely different. What I found the most impressive, or just something that I really didn't realize before when I saw the museum piece, was the fact that the entire surface of, for example, a sarcophagus, this is a word for a coffin, the inside and outside was completely covered with miniature hieroglyphs. And there were about 3 or 4 coffins encapsulated for only one mummy. It must have taken years to finish a sarcophagus of this kind. I also wish there would be more reference photos on the internet for creating realistic artworks inspired by ancient Egypt. It was hard for me to find enough reference material for making a unique piece of art out of it. If you know any resources of ancient Egypt costumes like headpieces, jewelry and models, please let me know in the comments. Before I start, I wanted to let you know that there's a 1 hour long real-time tutorial video of this painting available on my Patreon page. In this tutorial video, I explain every tiny step that I do in order to create the portrait portion of this piece, what you have to pay attention to when drawing portraits, tips and tricks, and of course, which materials I use. You get access to this and all my other tutorial videos by joining me on Patreon at the $5 reward tier. Don't forget to check out the new page that I've set up on my website at lioba.info/tutorials. Here you can find all my tutorials. It is uncluttered and easy to use, and you can always come back if you want to rewatch an older tutorial. I update it every time I release a new one. Link is in the description. Okay, and now let's begin with the tutorial part of this video. When drawing and painting portraits, I usually start out with adding a base skin tone to the area of the face. I also fill in the color of the lips, eyebrows and lashes. I then continue with adding more layers to this base. I fill in a layer of shadows underneath her eyes, nose and the jawline. At the beginning of the painting process, everything is very light and it doesn't look like the final color at all. I still put down the first layers in order to get an evenly filled in area on which I can later draw with my color pencils. If I would start drawing with color pencils without having put down a base color, the white of the paper would bother me and I would have to use a lot more pigment from the color pencils to cover these white spots. When painting the base, I need to be very careful. I use a combination of both wet and wet techniques and what I call normal watercolor layering method. When painting wet and wet, it is important to wet an area that is larger than the area you want to paint in. The watercolor will cover a large area, and when it reaches the outline of your previously moistured area, it will create hard edges that I don't necessarily want. For example, when painting the eye, I have to make the complete face wet again in order to create smooth blendings. Sometimes I forget that and I end up having some rougher edges. When I see that my watercolor touches the edge of a wet area, I can quickly expand this area with more water to prevent unintentional edges. However, watercolor is a very unpredictable medium and sometimes I try to give up the control because I feel my paintings would look better with those little abstractions and imperfections that emerge with this medium. When I think I added enough base color to my portrait, I continue with my color pencils. I mostly use polychromos color pencils because they are available here, and the more commonly used Prisma color pencils maybe in the US. I've just never seen them here, so I mostly use those polychromos. The paper as well is incredibly important for the result. Whenever I plan to create a very fine detailed drawing, I use hot pressed watercolor paper, Grana Satana from Fabriano or Arch, for example. And when I plan to create a looser piece, I use cold pressed watercolor paper, for example Hahnemühle Britannia. Please check out the description of this video for a list of all materials that I use. I use color pencils to add those tiny little color variations and values that the reference photo provides me with, but for which the watercolor medium is too unpredictable to render. So color pencils are always the first choice when I want to draw the nose, eyes and very subtle details in a gradation of the cheeks, for example. I also switch a lot forth and back between the two mediums whenever I notice that I need to get darker in a comparatively larger area. Then color pencils would add too much grain to the paper and the smoothness of the skin would get lost, so I use watercolor again. An important thing to mention when using these two mediums is that you should never draw on wet or moist paper with color pencils. The pigment won't adhere to the paper and the pressure will damage the surface of the paper, which can potentially ruin your drawing. Be careful here. I like to have a hairdryer in reach that I can use in between layers to have a smooth working progress without waiting times. After I finished the portion of the face, I continued working on her headdress. By the way, I created this motif by using a couple of different reference photos that I merged together in Photoshop in order to create a unique image. If you're interested in learning more about my preliminary Photoshop process, I created a video about this on my channel and a tutorial that covers the basics if you want to do it yourself that is available for my Patreon supporters. I will leave links in the description. When painting elaborate patterns like her Egyptian crown, sticking to the geometrical shapes is especially important. Unless you aim for a more looser style, it can be easy to make little mistakes and the whole crown looks crooked. The roses and the snake or bird, I couldn't really detect what kind it is on her head. On the other side, it didn't require as much care for the shape. When I painted these more blob-like forms, I only paid attention to the color values. In the end, I used blue gouache to give the feathers more dynamic and a body. Gouache is opaque watercolor and you can use it seamlessly with water-based mediums. I only had some strange behaviors when mixing it together with acrylic inks, but other than that, it's easy to use together with regular watercolor and color pencils. Every step of creating a portrait in watercolors requires a high amount of concentration, at least for me. Using pencils that aren't sharp enough or adding a spot of the wrong color in a light area of the portrait can ruin it in an instant. Watercolors and color pencils can't be erased. You can only try to cover up small mistakes. After having created tons of watercolor pieces, I learned that whenever that happens, starting over is most of the time the best thing to do, even though it can be really annoying. With this painting, however, I got lucky and I could create a piece that I really liked. This painting has already found a new home, but you can order limited edition prints of Imentet if you like. Link is in the description. I hope you found this video helpful and interesting. Let me know what you think in the comment section and give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Also, don't forget to subscribe. Have a wonderful day and I see you in the next one. Bye bye!